What's up, everybody? Welcome to GoJo and Golic. Mike Golic Jr., no Mike Golic Sr., Jesse Cofield holding it down for us in the DraftKings studio in Boston. We got a great show for you guys. As always, download, subscribe, rate, review, leave us a 5-star rating, and check us out live here Monday through Friday, 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern on DraftKingsNetwork.com, the YouTube channel, Samsung TV Plus, Roku, all those great places here. Plenty to get to as we are coming off Super Wildcard Weekend because of some of the weather on Super Wildcard Weekend. We now have not one but two football games still coming up today, which rocks. I understand that there were a lot of people that wanted to disparage the folks in Buffalo and the NFL for moving a football game because of the insane weather there, who promptly got sent back to the student section by everyone with a working brain. But now it gets us two football games on Monday, which once again, I'd imagine has to piss off the NBA. But Jesse, speaking of weather, that is also why my father's not here. Dad was calling the Cowboys and Packers game and decided to let me know via text message that I found this morning. So Dad is somewhere right now in transit, I think going towards Salt Lake City. We have a shot of his very empty, sad room. I forgot we could just power up his camera remote and he has no control. So there's a very sad, dark Arizona casita without my dad. So it's me and you, Jesse, today against the world.
But hold on. We need to get into this really quick. So he texted you late last night is what I'm understanding. Like wee hours of the morning. And
he texted me at 11:22 Pacific.
Okay.
Was when, or no, 11:11, make a wish. 11:11 Pacific. So I had been pretty dead asleep for about an hour at that point.
And nobody else. He just texted you. He didn't text a producer. He didn't email anyone. He was just like, hey man, I'm not going to be there in the morning. See ya.
More or less. And you know what? This is one of those spots where I want to make fun of him ruthlessly, but I also understand the moment he was at, because part of the appeal of him calling the early game was he can get a flight out of there. Normally, Dad calls the Sunday night games for Westwood One on radio, so he's there the next morning. He's doing the show from some hotel with us, and instead this time he had spent all day in travel hell. And Jesse, you and I both know what happens to your brain during a travel day. When the delays start to mount up, you're waiting there. Once de-icing becomes involved in the equation, everything goes to hell. So I am going to try and extend a little empathy to the old man right now.
Okay. We're cutting him some slack. We're not going to make fun of him.
A little bit. We'll see how I feel in hour number 2 once we've been gas bagging.
This could be a 1-hour special. Okay, let's just relax. Let's wait and see how
Holiday
it goes.
show, 1-hour special in it. Thank God, though, we at least have a bunch of good stuff to talk about, because the entire weekend was giving. Like, the Cowboys. America's team is at the very least America's content team, because they are never not doing the most sports talk radio friendly thing humanly possible. Like when the Dallas Cowboys are presented with an opportunity to give call-in based radio the easiest day of work known to man. You want to talk about working on a holiday. If you're a Dallas radio station, sweet Jesus, pop open the phone lines and let all hell break loose. Because I'd imagine, much like Jerry Jones, most Cowboys fans probably fired that entire staff somewhere in the middle of that game last night. Absolute nightmare stuff there. So we will get to plenty on that as the Packers sent the Cowboys completely packing. We also had a Miami Dolphins meltdown that's going to have people asking existential questions about Tua Tagovailoa and his future. But we got to get to what might actually be America's team after last night. The Detroit Lions are a movie football team. I think that's what we've all settled on, right? Because none of this feels real. Every bit of this, from the M&M-laden open to Sunday Night Football with Mike Tirico and company, which, by the way, Mom's Spaghetti looks delicious. The restaurant themed after the famed M&M line that they showed during the broadcast.
Isn't that his restaurant? Fan. It's Eminem's restaurant.
That's the thing I didn't really get out of that. Was it his?
It's Eminem's restaurant. He owns it.
Oh. Man, well, It looks wonderful. Never took Eminem for a Texas toast guy, but here we are. 2023 has a lot of surprises, including this year's Lions team. The Lions get the win against the Rams on Sunday Night Football It is their first playoff win in 32 years, as our producer Tom Glenn had pointed out before the show, and as I believe I heard Mike Tirico say on the broadcast last night, if you sent a text message to any of your friends about the Detroit Lions and congratulated them on the playoff win, it is the first text message that will ever read a Detroit Lions playoff win, because the last time they managed to do this, text messaging was not a real thing. They also end an NFL-long 9-game postseason losing streak. And because they will now host whoever wins between Tampa Bay and Philadelphia tonight, this will be the first time in Lions franchise history that they host 2 playoff games in the same postseason. And I say they're a movie team because everything that's happened with Dan Campbell and everything about his approach to the game is how you would script a movie head coach to be, right? Big, burly, former player. I'm sure at this juncture my dad would make some sort of comparison to The Rock in Walking Tall or whatever that movie was with him there, but my dad's, again, nowhere to be found in there, so I can't make the appropriate Rock movie reference. Thanks, Dad. But between Dan Campbell, who has approached it like that, who was the former player who walked in, who everybody sort of laughed at and snickered at after the opening press conference, and we saw it rehashed yesterday. I saw it all over the timeline. Dan Campbell, three-minute diatribe about biting kneecaps and what kind of football team they're going to be, to the Lions on Hard Knocks, that I think was really the moment where everyone started to look and go, all right, I don't know if it's going to work, but it's hard not to like these guys when you see the approach. Because the one thing that's pretty apparent about coaches, and I think this is true whether you've been inside of locker rooms or outside, is you can kind of tell when someone's full of it. You can kind of tell when someone's saying something because they believe it's the right button to push, and you could tell when they mean it. And Dan Campbell, when it's him talking about taking care of his guys' legs, but we got to learn how to tackle. Another clip I saw going around from Hard Knocks last night, drawing on the personal experience he has as a player, but reminding them that there's a plan. There's a reason we're all doing this stuff, and really imploring his guys for the belief and giving it back to them in the ways that he has, to now getting the moments where you see these shots in the stands of fans crying during the course of the game last night. Dan Campbell at the end of the game, in the moment that I thought, if you're looking for the symbolic difference of why they won this game, if you really want to try and mirror it in a way that seems poetic, look at the very end of the game last night and the decisions made by both head coaches as to why this game went the way it did, and sort of what's emblematic of the difference in the Lions culture inside this building is, at the end of the game, we had a hard-fought back-and-forth game here. The Lions end up winning this game by 1 point. Like, it was by no means a blowout. It's 24-23. But the Rams had the ball with about 4 minutes left in the game. They end up backed up on 3rd and 14. It's an incomplete pass that looks like it's got a bunch of holding on it. Puka Nacua is getting grabbed and tugged on, but it had been a physical game all night, so the refs let it go. And it's 4th and 14 in plus territory, and the Rams only have 1 timeout left. And Sean McVay opts to punt. You can say it's faith in his defense, whatever, what have you, but with 1 timeout left, there's a very real chance you're punting that ball away and might never get it back, but it's what he feels like he has to do in that moment. That's the decision that gets made on one side. On the other side, with Dan Campbell, they get the ball back, they're driving, and it gets down to the 2-minute warning. 2-minute warning, the Rams have 1 timeout left on the other side of that to try and call and slow down this game. So really, the Lions are 1 first down from making it happen. And they've been running in the lead up to the 2-minute warning, because that's what you do at that point in the game. Dan Campbell comes out of the 2-minute warning and has Jared Goff drop back and throw a pass for the first down that ultimately ices the game. Puts it on the line, puts everything on the table and makes it happen in that spot. The belief in his quarterback to get that done, his quarterback in Jared Goff, who had obviously been much maligned, who talked about this week how much the end of his time in Los Angeles affected him mentally, shook his confidence, all the things that happen when a team tells you you're not good enough and we want to go get someone better. And in this case, it just happened to be a wife swap of quarterbacks with Matthew Stafford and Jared Goff. And Matthew Stafford, who played great in this game, who was an absolute warrior. We will talk about the, ugly shot in the game, him going back in a way that I'd imagine is going to be interesting for the NFL to try and answer for today, and the independent neurological consultant in that process that's still supposed to go on. But Matthew Stafford, in his first return trip to Detroit, Now, as a former member of the Lions, a guy who went through all of the pain and a lot of the pain, some of the worst years of the Lions franchise that are now the source of the catharsis for all these fans, he had to watch as Jared Goff, his counterpart, got the chance that his coach gave him on the other side to go out and win that game. Like, the analytics movement needs to invite Dan Campbell to the Sloan Conference in Boston at MIT next year. They need to make him the poster child, because analytically inclined decisions, that level of aggressiveness has so often been attributed to the nerds. Dan Campbell's made it Manalytics, Danalytics, whatever you want to call it. He's made being aggressive and pivotal moments seem like it's just a football guy thing again and not a numbers thing again, because that's what that was, and that's what we always talk about, Dad and I, on this show, of a coach having confidence and giving it to his players, saying, I believe in you to go win it. So much of old school football, the conservative-minded football, is we're going to play not to lose. We're going to punt on 4th and 14 instead of maybe gunning it, saying, hey, we're going to see if we can let Matthew Stafford win the game for us on 4th down here, instead of hoping that a bunch of other things will happen. We'll take the most direct path to victory, and that's what Dan Campbell did. And you could see it, how much it meant to him, how much it meant to this locker room, and how much it meant to Jared Goff. This was Dan Campbell after the game handing out the game balls to not only their GM Brad Holmes, but to their star quarterback. And make no mistake, they think he's a star in Jared Goff.
Dude, how electric was it out there? I'm telling you what, it doesn't get any better. It's everything you dream up and then more. All right, that's outstanding work. I got 2 game balls. All right, number 1, listen, when you come in 3 years ago, like me and this guy did, and you had a vision and you start working together and you've got an idea how you want to build it and the type of players you're looking for and how you want to go top to bottom, offense, defense, special teams, and you're in fucking lockstep. You're in fucking lockstep. I'm telling you guys, it's a shitty business. It ain't always perfect, but we do a pretty good job, dude. But without this fucking guy right here, man, Brad Holmes. Okay, I'll just say it like this. All right? Hey, you're good enough for Detroit, Jay.
You're good enough for Detroit. Come on. Oh, the pride.
That's what I mean. Like, it's the line at the end of a movie, and it all feels like it's so caked in cheese, but at the same time, you believe it because we've seen it. Like, this has been consistently Dan Campbell. I go back to the point of, you can tell when a coach is full of it. This has been who Dan has been every step of the way as a head coach. The guy who is overwhelmingly invested in his staff that's full of former players and in his locker room full of guys that in some ways, like Jared Goff, were cast-offs from another place. And I saw Kevin Clark did a great piece about Dan Campbell when he first took the job, and Dan talked about all the things about Detroit as a city that really rang true to him, about a city that was hit so hard by the financial crisis and the housing collapse in 2008, and about how the auto market went to hell, and all this stuff about how it was a city that had been constantly the butt of jokes, that he thought, man, if I could come and help resurrect this. And now he has. And that moment there with Jared Goff, like, he's a guy, I don't think will ever be a quarterback that's going to be like the MVP of a Super Bowl team. I still don't know that with Jared Goff. He thrives in the way that they have allowed him to play quarterback in that offense. We've seen him take the Rams to a Super Bowl before, but there's always been questions about how much of that is his versus the coordinator versus the coach. But this is a different Jared Goff that they've gotten there, because there is nothing more powerful than a coach that actually believes in you and reinforces it. We've talked about it till we're blue in the face with Tua Tagovailoa and Mike McDaniel in Miami, and how he went through in the 700 clip play thing, all culminating in a quarterback that now has gotten the best out of him there. We'll see how far that can go. But I think the same is true of Dan Campbell, and then some with Jared Goff in Detroit. So it's been cool watching all the emotive parts of what went on there. From a football standpoint, it was also it was every bit of the game we expected. It was by far the best game of Wild Card Weekend in terms of what we got play-wise on the field from all these guys. I think for Detroit, my dad's always partial. He loves, the other guys that show up, not the star players in the stat sheet, the guys that are the role players that make winning happen. And I think for Detroit, you've seen a guy like Aleem McNeil, their defensive tackle who was on IR for a portion of the end of the season, come in there. He was a part of that big hit on Matthew Stafford that ultimately almost knocked him out of the game. Aiden Hutchinson obviously was a monster last night, had some big pressures and hits late in that game on Matthew Stafford to try and force them into that punting situation. Frank Ragnow and what he's meant to this offensive line when he's been healthy as the center in the middle of that group. That group was shuffled around and beat up with injury for a lot of the year. Frank's on the injury report every week with like a toe and a back and a knee. He's got everything there. And when he's out there, steadies the ship in such a way that allows them to go do it. I thought they set the tone physically on both lines of scrimmage. We talked about last week how their run defense towards the back half of the season has actually been one of the best in football. Even though for stretches it looked like, it was going to be the same old Lions defense in that regard. Going up against a Rams team on the other side that had been resurgent in that area. We talked to, our guy Steve Avila last week about the Rams' reapproach to the ground game, downhill, Kyron Williams, and you saw a physical-ass football game where a lot of that Rams core of skill players got the hell beat out of them. Kyron Williams left that game in the fourth quarter with a hand injury that he was dealing with. Puka Nacua got checked out by the independent neurological consultant on the sideline during that game. It was getting ragdolled in the secondary despite another rookie record-setting performance, 181 receiving yards in this game. He was sensational, but the hit on Matthew Stafford, I think, is going to be the real interesting one to hear the response from everyone today. In the second half of this game, Matthew Stafford takes a shot in the pocket where he is dragged down. He gets hit on one side, and then Aleem McNeil was coming from the middle, and as Stafford's kind of getting pulled away, hits him, and you see Stafford's head. We all see the shot of Stafford's head hit off the turf, and it looks like his eyes rolled back, and it looks like the lights went off there for a second. We all thought he got knocked out. He goes over on the sideline to get checked, and I think there was a commercial break or a TV timeout, and then all of a sudden on the other side of that in the next series, he's back and ready to go. And listen, the NFL has earned our skepticism when it comes to this process. It's a big-time game. None of us were looking forward to the prospect of Carson Wentz, the backup for the Rams, potentially having to come in and finish out that game because it had been electric. And the storyline of Matthew Stafford being back there was such a huge part of it. God, the job Tirico and Collinsworth did during that first drive for the Rams when Stafford took the field and the boo birds rained down and it gave way to the overwhelming noise of that first series, and they just laid out and let it all happen. It was elite scene setting. It was incredible. And it gave way to a game where Matthew Stafford looked every bit like the guy you'd want to replace Jared Goff. Like, he was the better quarterback in that game. What he does, and Jared Goff played a great game. Like, I'm not disputing that, but Matthew Stafford, we can all see, clearly the better quarterback of the two. What he did under pressure, some of those throws, just freakish. From a guy who's, 35 years old now? In that range, Matthew Stafford found the fountain of youth this year. Like, Matthew Stafford was a, top 10, borderline top 5 quarterback for the majority of this season when he was healthy. It was sensational. And so we all understood. We all wanted him out on the field. But at the same time, we also all saw that and we're like, all right, what version of a concussion test did he pass to get back out there? And it's possible he did. Like, I don't want to begrudge that. I want to wait to hear from, people like Stefania Bell over at ESPN, the people who I trust around this process, because remember, it's the independent neurological consultant. It's not the team clearing him back out there. It's those guys that are in charge of this that are supposed to be the third-party arm for the NFL out there. You even heard them buzz in just to make sure they had checked on Puka Nacua after one of those plays. And so I will wait to see what the answer looks like from them, because that was definitely a moment that looked like it could be the eyesore on what was otherwise a sensational game. The Rams are going to have a ton to be excited about next year. We saw a team reset with one of the best rookie classes in a while, even full of guys outside of the first round, that completely changed the outlook of this team. But congratulations to Dan Campbell and these Detroit Lions, who now, I mean, again, they're going to get the winner of the Eagles-Tampa Bay Buccaneers game that doesn't look like it's going to be a real murderer's row on either side, as we'll talk about. And so they are primed to potentially go from not having played or not having won a playoff game in 32 years to potentially winning multiple and punching their ticket to the NFC Championship based on how they looked and based how solid the foundation looks for that team right now. But coming up next, Let's take a trip down to Cowboys country and figure out if Jerry is ready to hit the panic switch yet after yet another and maybe the most infamous now Cowboys postseason collapse of my lifetime.
To GoJo and Golic. This one really put the Wild in Wild Card Weekend. Did anybody have the Cowboys getting blown out by the Packers at home on their bingo cards? Certainly not me. Now, after the game, Dallas owner Jerry Jones very reluctant to speak about the future of Mike McCarthy here.
I won't get into any of the addressing of any aspects of it, any part of it. From the coaching to the players to what's around the corner. On a personal basis, I'm floored. And so not that there's any world's smallest violin for me being floored. I get that. I understand that. And I know where the responsibility starts and ends. And I've got that real clear, and I know that. But that's not the point. The point is that I'm disappointed for everybody.
All right. I mean, GoJo, just talk to me about this game, this blowout that happened. And then, I mean, 3 straight 12-win seasons. It's still just not good enough for the Cowboys here.
Yeah, the Cowboys are in a fascinating conundrum right now because last night was deeply embarrassing for that team. There's no two ways to slice it. The final score is a complete misnomer. Like, it's 48-32 because of a bunch of late game garbage time work by the Cowboys that could have, in theory, made it interesting with the final onside kick still up in the balance. But you look, all of their box score numbers are inflated. Dak Prescott, I think, set a Cowboys franchise record with 60 passing attempts in this game, ends up with over 400 yards, 3 touchdowns to 2 interceptions, but that was hardly the story of the game. The 2 interceptions and what the Green Bay Packers defense did to them in the body of this game was the story of the game. This was as lopsided as they come when the game was actually in balance. Jordan Love played a masterful game, like a cherry on top of a season that's been the culmination of this guy taking over the starting role there. And Jesse, you're right, is that what's hard to figure out with Dallas is what you can do for a team that has been undoubtedly good, but not good enough in big moments. And God, as a Notre Dame fan, I unfortunately empathize with this situation way too much. But this stat, to me, there's 2 things that jumped out here. ESPN Stats and Info, the Cowboys are the first team to win 12 games in 3 straight seasons and fail to make a conference championship in any of them. That is since the AFC-NFC created the NFL merger in 1970. So you've got that on one side. They are also, since the merger, the only team, on the other side, the Packers are the only team to beat the number 1 scoring offense by 30 or more points in a playoff since the Super Bowl winning Seattle Seahawks, who beat the Broncos in 2013. This is an absolute drubbing, and they didn't end up beating them by 30 plus. So that stat was dated, and I apologize. But either way, looking at the way this played out, the Cowboys have been really good during the regular season. They've had a roster that has been building towards this moment. Going into this season, this was supposed to be the year where, whether it was our folks over at FTN and Aaron Schatz who came on the show, or pundits who looked at this roster, this was supposed to be the year that they were able to get over the hump if they were going to do it. And now, Jesse, to your point about what we heard from Jerry Jones, it was instability right now. And it's the same instability that's hung over their head this entire season, because Dak Prescott is going to count $59.9 million against the cap next year, and they've done nothing about smoothing that over in a way that makes you wonder what their plan is with him at this point. Because everyone thought, oh, you like Dak Prescott. He's coming off undeniably the best season of his career. If Lamar Jackson wasn't real, Dak Prescott would probably be your MVP, or at the very least very close between him, Brock Purdy, some of the other names, Tyreek Hill, that we've talked about. Dak Prescott cut down on the interceptions like they wanted to after throwing 15 last year. He was incredibly productive in the relationship with CeeDee Lamb, and all of that stuff went Freaky Friday. We saw the shots of him and CeeDee Lamb on the sideline not looking like they were on the same page. And again, Lamb ended up with 9 catches for 110 yards, but it hardly felt like that in the moments of the game where they had a chance to influence the outcome. And still, on the other side, you look at the Cowboys defense that gave up 143 yards rushing and say that's been the common problem for all the head coaching interviews that we think Dan Quinn is going to get since he's come over here in Dallas. And they tried to address it in the draft this year, drafting Mozzie Smith out of Michigan, and that didn't pan out the way they wanted to. The Cowboys' inability to stop the run has ultimately been, I think, at the source and at the core of their demise as a football team when it's come to these pivotal moments in the postseason. And so now, because, like, Jesse, if this was a normal instance with a normal football team, I would usually advocate for some measure of patience. Like, hey, it's worked. Like, process-wise, it's gotten you to this point in the last 3 years. You've won the division 2 out of the last 3 years. You're getting to the dance, and if you just get enough tickets to the dance, eventually you might actually get to where you want to go. But with the Cowboys, we know that's not how it works, because Jerry Jones is old and only getting older, and he's a man who thirsts after one thing and who's now been embarrassed publicly so many times, even recently, let alone since the triplets era. Like, this man just finally swallowed his pride enough to let Jimmy Johnson into the Cowboys Ring of Honor. I can't expect him to act rationally or reasonably, and there's part of me that doesn't think it's irrational or unreasonable, because this feels like the definition of insanity type thing, where, all right, at some point, this current Cowboys core, Jesse, when they get to big moments, has just not had the stuff that they have needed to get over the hump here. And so because of that, and you've got a bunch of aging veterans on this team, like I think a lot like we thought for the Buffalo Bills going into this season, this feels like the last best shot for this current iteration of the Cowboys roster, because you're probably going to lose Dan Quinn this offseason, and because there's some older free agents that you might struggle to pay coming into next year. And so you're going to have to, I think, start to make that pivot that we've seen Kansas City and Cincinnati and some of these other teams with expensive quarterbacks make.
Yeah, I also just think when I'm thinking, you're talking about personnel on the team, but I can't stop thinking about Mike McCarthy getting fired, which seems like it's inevitable, and the absolute feeding frenzy that's going to happen for teams. Because think about him as a coach. Don't you think teams are going to be falling over themselves to hire this guy?
So Greg Olsen said that in the broadcast yesterday, and I don't think so.
Really?
I think just because look at who else is available this hiring cycle for coaches. Like Mike McCarthy, amongst the name of veteran head coaches on the market, would certainly be valuable, but would he be more valuable than Bill Belichick? Would he be more valuable than Jim Harbaugh getting back into things? Like, I don't know the answer to that. And Mike McCarthy has done a masterful job. He took back over as the offensive play caller this year. Almost all their offensive numbers seem to jump through the roof. We said he got the best out of Dak Prescott, but between the amount of veteran head coaches on the market and the amount of young, hot coordinator names that you could go after, I don't know if, he would definitely have a job, but falling all over, I don't know if I would go that far.
Wow.
I think that would be my issue.
Okay. Well, I just keep reading these quotes from Jerry Jones about, he said, this seems like the most painful playoff loss because we all had such great expectations and hope for this team. I'm floored. This is beyond my comprehension. He's talking about this in life or death terms.
Because for him it is. For him, this is that team. And make no mistake, I don't ever advocate for people to get fired. I'm just not comfortable with that. Jerry Jones is going to fire. This guy is going to calm down. He is going to fire everybody that's associated with this. I wouldn't be surprised if he tries to do something and flip Dak Prescott. This is going to be a man that we're seeing driven to levels of desperation. The Cowboys, this is the most amount of points. The Cowboys had never given up more than 40 points in the history of their franchise until this weekend. In a game against a Packers team that had Jordan Love in his first year as a starter that is now moving on to the next round. That is something that Jerry Jones, I just don't think is going to be able to stomach. And from a football standpoint now, there have been so many things to like about this team. But again, the obvious flaw of, all right, at the very core of it, you can't stop the run at all. And on the other side, you couldn't run the football, this base level cliche football stuff that we all talk about till we're blue in the face and feels less relevant than ever because of the way that football's moved on. Now all of a sudden shows up in the biggest moments. Once we get to, January and February football, run and stop the run. If you can't do it, you don't have to be able to do it great, but if you can't really do it at all, man, oh man, the problems start to look like the ones Jerry Jones and his friends are going to have here in Dallas.
Welcome back to GoJo and Golic. It is time for Mic'd Up Monday. Hell of a weekend for the Texans. Okay, kicking off the NFL playoffs by handing Cleveland their worst playoff loss since 1968 in a 45-14 win on Saturday. Now, after the game, rookie coach D'Amico Ryans was obviously pretty hyped.
Here we go, man. Hey, unbelievable, right? Unbelievable, guys. We talk about, all right, making that one person proud. A lot of people are proud of you guys, man. You guys went out, you put on, you dominated. You dominated a really good football team, and we earned it. We talk about an opportunity you guys earned up, and then you came and showed what Texan-style football looked like. Right? Everybody put on offense. Awesome job. Defense. Score how many? Also, hey, you talk about a complete game all the way around, man. Complete game, complete domination. You talk about the focus. We talk about execution. That's what it looks like.
Here we go, baby. Here we go. Y'all know what time it is. Texans!
Okay, so one thing that I do just have to point out about that speech that made me giggle a little bit was D'Amico Ryans being like, you went out there and beat a really good football team, and then I'm just thinking of Joe Flacco throwing back-to-back pick sixes. But very cool regardless.
Very cool regardless indeed. Yeah, the Texans, you know what? That's absolutely the way I'd frame it. And I do think the Browns are very good. And the Texans, you can say you forced them into being that bad. And Joe Flacco had been on a tear, ended up running into the nightmare that is the Houston Texans. And to help us out with that and the rest of the show here, our knight in shining armor, the one and only Jason Fitz. You guys know him. Host over at Yahoo Sports, covering college football, the NFL, and all variety of sports. You can hear him on Fox Sports Radio as well on the weekend. Fresh off the treadmill at Orange Theory Fitness, Jason heard our cries that our father, I'm sorry, who art in heaven. No, my dad, who is just art on a plane, and came to help us out here. So, Jason, we appreciate you, buddy.
I'm basically the Joe Flacco of this show, right? I came off the couch. I'm an old guy. Nobody can figure out if I'm actually good at what I do. Like, sometimes it seems like it's really good. Sometimes I'm like, what the hell? How does he have a job? How is he still in the league? Like, I am the Joe Flacco of sports talk media. You know, I feel like they're going to debate whether or not I'm elite day in and day out for the rest of the year. No, they're not. Nobody cares.
Well, I could see that. The only difference between you guys, Jason, is we had that shot of Joe Flacco. I think it was on the Thanksgiving game when they had to play at night, falling asleep on the sideline. And you would never have any issues staying awake because you're more caffeinated than any person I've ever met.
Yeah, that's probably. And by the way, even though I'm older than Joe, no salt and pepper happening here. Like, I'm holding the salt and pepper off. So I feel like a little bit, just pointing out, it might be the old man on the block, but sneaky vampire still.
How well caffeinated, though? Because I was thinking, we were talking about Dan Campbell's 1,100 milligrams of caffeine a day. Are you Dan Campbell status?
So this is a very true story. When I was one of the tours, I was out on the road. I was out and I was working, and we'd been gone for a while. And I said to one of my buddies, I was like, man, my stomach doesn't feel the best. And he's like, well, what do you eat? And I'm like, no, like, I eat pretty clean. And he's like, well, what are you drinking? And I was like, well, just the usual. He's like, well, how many sugar-free Red Bulls did you have yesterday? And I was like, the case. Like, that's not a big deal for me to drink a case of sugar-free Red Bull. Like, I was drinking a Ryder every day. Like, I got rid of my coffee pot at the house because I would drink 4 or 5 pots of iced coffee a day on top of 4 or 5 energy drinks. On like those pre-workouts. I took the pre-workout before I go in. Everybody's like, oh, it gets me jittery. No. But here's the craziest part about it. Then after all that Red Bull, everybody was like, hey, you should really give up caffeine. So cold turkey, I just gave up all caffeine and went to only water. Never had a headache, didn't feel any different. Like, I just like the taste of caffeinated drinks, but caffeine itself doesn't choose me one way or the other. I got a C4 happening with me now after my pre-workout and my mid-workout. And like, I like the taste of that stuff.
Man, you should donate your body to science, for sure.
Jesse, he really is Dan Campbell. The first show Jason and I ever worked on together, he walked out. When I walked out onto the set, Jason was sitting there, and he had 2 of the Monster Energy drink cans And then on top of that, he had 2 5-hour energies, and he drank them all in like the 15 minutes before we went on air. I was like, dude, just do cocaine.
Yeah, I mean,
like it'd be so much more efficient if you just did drugs, but
just grow up and do drugs. Yeah, I mean, my heart would explode out of my body if I did that.
We don't have to live in an either-or world. Okay. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
It does both, all right? Come on.
I'm kidding. Of a team that looked like they were shot out of a cannon by a combination of caffeine and drugs. This Houston Texans team, Fitz, they did. How did you see this game going at the start, and how surprised were you by the result, Fitz?
So I think, look, realistically, I didn't put money on this game as somebody that likes to dabble because I was uncomfortable trying to figure out who's going to win it. I thought it was going to come down to the wire. We all knew Flacco made mistakes. We knew that he'd thrown a lot of picks. It just hadn't bitten him in the butt yet. So I thought that might be a factor in this game. I never expected C.J. Stroud to do what C.J. Stroud did. And I'll never forget last year, sitting there with Harry Douglas at the time. We were at the game against Georgia, and you saw sort of the awakening of everybody in the consciousness of C.J. Stroud because he showed more of the athleticism, blah, 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 all these things. I think most of us that cover college football understood that C.J. Stroud was going to be very good. I don't think anybody understood that C.J. Stroud was going to be historic because that's like the only way to say what we've seen this year is this is a historic rookie year for a quarterback that has come in and never looks overwhelmed. That was a great defense that he took on, and he just sliced and diced them. So to me, this was all about the fact, and I would argue that every single fan of a team that sucks can look right now at the Lions and the Texans and say, you know what? We have hope because you get the right guy on the sideline and everything else can start to make sense. The Texans are living, breathing. Like a year ago right now, it was supposed to be a job nobody wanted and a franchise that was going to be picking at the top of the draft forever. And instead, now they look like I mean, C.J. Stroud, how many quarterbacks in the AFC right now today are better than C.J. Stroud? The number is alarmingly small.
It is. And to your point about those two teams, I think it's worth noting very different ways they came to this, right? The Lions were a lot slower. They went through for the years, the beginning of Dan Campbell's tenure, where they were still losing those close games and had to learn how to do that. Didn't do it with a quarterback that was their top overall pick. He was a cast-off from another team and still found their way back to the dance, are having this success now. And the Texans, they were able to microwave this overnight. Complete vibe change in the organization between the front office and Nick Saban and what he's done, the head coach and D'Amico Ryans, and certainly nailing your quarterback the way they seem to with C.J. Stroud. I will give Fitz, though, their trenches a lot of credit, and I think that's gone a long way in how this team has operated this year around C.J. Stroud. Big number for me, 0. No sacks allowed against that Browns defense. And I get Myles Garrett's been banged up down the stretch of the season. That probably goes a long way in it. But Laramie Tunsil and that group up front have done a job when they've been healthy protecting C.J. Stroud this year. And the other side, how about their other top pick? Will Anderson Jr. and this Texans D-line, they were third this season in ESPN's pass rush win rate metric. They were getting to the quarterback, even if it wasn't always sacks. Derek Barnett, who they picked up for the last 6 games of the year, went off in this game and was pressuring the quarterback. To me, that was the difference. Their edge guys against the backup tackles for the Cleveland Browns completely flushed the pipes and showed where all the cracks were in this game.
You mentioned 0 as the number you loved, as in 0 sacks allowed. I'll give you the number 1. There was only 1 quarterback hit by the Browns in this entire game. They only touched C.J. Stroud once. Like, you think about what that says to how strong that line is. That says everything, right? So when you've got a combination of the fat guys up front playing really well and a quarterback that can climb the pocket and a couple of wide receivers that can get open against basically anybody at this point, you have the method on one side of the ball. And the Will Anderson Jr. part of it, I think we've really slept on because of how good C.J. Stroud has been. Will Anderson Jr. has been every bit the discovery people thought he would be. And I was covering the draft. There were people when the draft happened that said, I don't know. I mean, it seems like that's a big... They've rolled a lot on those 2 players, and they rolled the dice and they won, dude.
They did. People looked at the draft capital it took to trade back up to get Will at the spot that they did and said, this is too much for a rusher unless he goes out there and is basically the second coming. And while maybe the sack production didn't get there until later in the year, the guy's a captain on your team as a rookie and has undoubtedly been a force of nature on that defense. So they get high marks all around and they continue to move on and keep the story going.
back to GoJo and Golic. I don't know if you guys heard, but it was pretty cold in Kansas City on Saturday. There was a very memorable image from the Chiefs' wildcard win over the Dolphins where Patrick Mahomes' helmet cracked, literally physically cracked after taking a hit as he tried to work his way to the end zone on a scramble. After the game, Mahomes discussed what he was thinking on the play here.
Yeah, I was trying to get in there. I was trying to get in that end zone. A young Pat would have got in. I'm getting a little old. Like Tennessee, I would have spun, got up in there, but I got squared up and got my helmet cracked. But I try not to do it too much, but it's playoff time. Sometimes you got to put it on the line and try to get in the end zone to win football games.
28-year-old Patrick Mahomes talking about when he was young makes me feel ancient.
Yes. Yeah, I didn't need that to start my day at all, but football does age you differently, so I won't begrudge him that, but Jesus Christ, Pat, leave us alone. I didn't come here to be attacked on a holiday Monday, but Jason,
no, you guys are both
wait.
You guys are both wrong. You're both wrong about this.
Yeah.
It gives me hope. I need Mahomes to start feeling old and rich. The sooner he decides he's old and rich, the sooner he decides maybe football's not for him anymore. And then, he just rides off into the sun. Like, hey, Pat, if you've made all your money and had all your success and want to just go ahead and retire, I respect that decision immensely. And it has nothing to do with the Raiders hoodie I'm wearing or the Raiders jersey that's behind me, of course. It's just respect to the man. I mean, if he wants to decide that, hey, I could go invest in some businesses and maybe hang it up, that'd be fine.
I was going to say, if you are not watching on the DraftKingsNetwork.com or YouTube channel, you can't see Jason is cloaked in Raiders black, as he almost always is. So, Patrick, if you want to do the rest of the division a favor, certainly do that. The rest of general football fans, although I'd have a feeling, Jason, there are more and more people that are starting to feel like you between the way that people continue to somehow get aggravated about Taylor Swift just existing around football. And I think the Chiefs being as good as they have for as long as they have now, I think the general NFL population is starting to turn on them the way that NBA fans did on the Warriors a few years ago. It seems like we're at that point now. Yeah,
and the funny thing is if there's anybody in the world that would have that in them, I think it would be me, because I am a lifelong diehard Raiders fan. And honestly, Mike, I'm sort of the opposite. There are times I watched that game and I thought, man, as Mahomes escaped and went down the sidelines for what felt like a 70-yard run, it wasn't. But and you could feel him essentially take the air out of the tires of the Dolphins. I just kept looking at it and saying, man, I'm going to appreciate greatness. Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes together are greatness. And there is a level of, I can respect that no matter what. And, there's the moment with the Chiefs right now where when everything is breaking down, Kelsey is not the Kelsey we're used to seeing. And we haven't seen great production from the wide receivers. At the same time, we've seen Rashee Rice sort of elevate into this great young playmaker. We're seeing Pacheco become the guy that they need Pacheco to be. And Mahomes is doing Mahomesian things. I just sat there against the Dolphins and thought, man, there's one team here that's playing chess, and it's fun to watch.
Yeah, I think that was a reminder that no matter what we think of the Chiefs' ceiling this year, based on some of their roster flaws and the things that have been an issue for them, the floor is still insanely high. The benefit of the experience of where they've been when they got in this moment, and especially in this environment, minus 30 with the wind chill, the coldest NFL game that we've ever seen that does shatter a helmet, which is something I didn't even know was freaking possible in a football game. I've seen them caved in before. I have never seen one just shatter like that. But for them to go out there and essentially normalize that quickly, the very first drive, they sent the message where Mahomes comes out firing through the air, and you then get Isaiah Pacheco, who, imagine having to tackle him in the cold. It's bad enough. Everything hurts when the weather's that cold. And then you've got to tackle a man who's somehow angrier than the cold wind in Isaiah Pacheco. And all of it for them just seemed like it was another day out there. And they were not deterred, and they set the tone physically on the offensive line. Defensively, Spags put together another one of those beautiful bespoke postseason game plans that we're used to, where he was able to get Tua off his first read, get him to hold on to the ball and check it down a lot more. They rallied and tackled incredibly well. This was them checking a box, saying, listen, I don't know if they're going to be able to beat the Baltimore Ravens. I think there's some bad matchups that could potentially be out there for the Chiefs, and this one just ended up being the perfect one. You had a Dolphins team that was so devoid of edge talent on the defensive side because they had been robbed by injury that they weren't going to be able to pressure Mahomes in the way that other teams have been able to have to, even though they got a little bit of help back at tackle, did the Kansas City Chiefs, but you were going to be screwed up with it there. And then the Dolphins, it was like the Lifetime Achievement Award of injury on the offensive line that was coming back to haunt them in this postseason game. So I don't know. It just looked like a very mature football team in a way that was a good reminder for everybody why Kansas City is always going to be in this conversation.
So, and I agree with everything you just said. I also, though, want to put a little bit on the plate of the Dolphins in like one number that always stands out to me is snap count. And I think at some point you got to look at snap count, not just time of possession, but snap count as a game goes on like this. And we were in the second quarter of this at one point. I think the Dolphins had a total of 8 snaps. Like they couldn't get anything going. What really stood out to me is as a team, the Dolphins had less carries as a team than Isaiah Pacheco had as an individual. I think that was a failed part of the game plan. I mean, you remember late in the game, I think it was 3rd and 2, and instead of just trying to run the ball, they throw this little out to Mostert on the side. Like they're trying to do this quick bubble screen, and I didn't understand the play call. Like I thought that the Dolphins, from a play calling standpoint, just didn't try to make anything easy for themselves. I know they were banged up, and I get all of that. I looked at Mike McDaniel, and I thought, man, there's one side of this, Andy Reid, that came in and said, I'm going to figure out how to control this game, and we're going to alt what we do to make sure that we can do that. From the Dolphins, I just looked at it and it's like, well, this is what we do, and we're going to try and do it no matter what the conditions are. That didn't work for me. I think as much as we keep talking about Tua, we should also be talking about overall the play calling. I did not think it was a great game plan from the outset for the Dolphins.
Well, and it does make you wonder how much of that is Mike McDaniel as the play caller, who now we've seen in back-to-back years. Remember at the end of last season after the Chargers game, there was a thought that the blueprint was out on how to slow down what had been a great Miami offense that season, and then they've gone out and put up historic numbers this season against most people. But we know the postseason in the NFL is different. And Steve Spagnuolo, I saw Dan Orlovsky tweet this. Spags, they played 8 different fronts on defense and showed 7 different coverage types yesterday that Dan Orlovsky saw out of the Kansas City Chiefs, and anybody watching that game could see they were throwing a lot at them. And for the Dolphins, Jason, it seemed like, with all the motion in there, it seems like they have to do a lot to get those results. It's hardly ever just the simplest path. That's what I thought was most interesting about the Rams is, yeah, they've got all the window dressing, but they could just hand it off and go downhill and gain yards for the vast majority of the end of this season. And whether it's because the offensive line, like we said, had been injured all year long, they had been shuffling and moving guys around there in a way that's been forgotten now and nobody cares about because you're out there, but was absolutely reality. And then the quarterback, Jason, people look at Tua Tagovailoa as, all right, when he has to hold on to the ball for longer than the light speed it usually takes him to get it out in that offense, what does he afford you as a quarterback? And I think that's the question they're going to have to ask going forward now as they get into. They picked up his 5th-year option. That's coming up this year. And Jason, I don't see them giving him a record extension. Like, I think he's earned the right to be their quarterback next year, but I don't think it's at a cost that's prohibitive.
No, I agree with you. I think to your point on having to hold the ball and then go through the process is really an interesting one because we were just talking about C.J. Stroud. That's something that the number of times we saw C.J. Stroud do that in this game. I'll use another example of somebody that Matt Stafford at times has been overlooked in his career. The number of times in that game that we watched Stafford make something out of nothing and his ability with his eyes to move everybody around. I mean, you just saw control. And I don't know that we see that necessarily from Tua at the same level. If I'm the Dolphins, yes, I have the 5th-year option. I also have the franchise tag. And I'm willing to let all of that play out. Because the one thing I'm not going to do is invest bad money. And at some point, I'm not going to invest great money in a mediocre quarterback. And I don't know today how good Tua can be. So I'm going to make this process play out. And if I got to Kirk Cousins it and keep franchising it until I figure that out, I would rather do that. I think there are real question marks around Tua. Obviously, it's interesting. I do think it's fair to look at McDaniel and say, hey, you got to figure this out. And I think the roster construction needs to take a long look in the mirror because you're the one that said to me a long time ago, and it's stuck in my head, if that offense hadn't put 70 on Denver, would we talk about them the same way? I think we know now after watching the offense for the last month, the answer to that question is no, we wouldn't. And that one outlier game shouldn't control the narrative.
No, their record against teams above 500, against playoff teams, was something we harped on a lot towards the end of the season. And now you're right, Mike McDaniel's got to be able to show the ability to do what a lot of his predecessors in his coaching tree, between Kyle Shanahan, between Sean McVay, have been able to do. And that's adjust when other people, especially the top-end talent in the NFL, have caught up to, in the biggest moments, what you've been doing offensively and how you've gone about winning, and figure out what the off-speed pitch is going to be to get them over the hump.
back to GoJo and Golic. Time to review our Cash It or Trash It segment presented by DraftKings Fantasy Sports. Check out what DraftKings has to offer this season with code GoJo because life's more fun when you're in on the action. DraftKings, the crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Age and eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. See DraftKings.com for details. So we talked going into the weekend about Rams lines, okay? Rams getting 3 points. GoJo, you like the Rams. Senior liked the Lions. So let's get a little reaction here. How do we feel, Junior? You had Rams +3. Senior had Lions -3.
Yeah, thankfully the constraints of this forced me into just doing the Rams and the points because I picked the Rams outright going into this weekend too and was wrong about that, albeit by 1 point. It was a great game. It was probably the only really competitive game of the weekend. So I feel pretty good about that one right now. It's exactly what I expected. The big plays that we got out of that Rams passing offense. Puka Nacua was incredible yet again. Matthew Stafford, Fitz, that was one of the tougher and grittier performances. I know we're going to ask the question of should he have even been out there after the hit where it looked like he got knocked out. And obviously, that's a worthwhile question. The NFL's history with head trauma is all there. But I also do have to marvel at just the fact that Matthew Stafford, even after that, even after hitting his hand off of Lee McNeil's helmet early in that game, seeing it covered in blood, already bandaged up, managed to do the things he did in that game. That's a guy that the Rams can be very excited about next year because their quarterback played like a top 5 guy yet again around a young core that seems to have really reset the clock for this team now.
Yeah, and the funny thing is they talked about Stafford leading into this game. We're reminded how long he's been in this league. And I almost forget that. It feels like it wasn't that long ago, too, that it was, is Stafford coming back? How long will they have him? He made it clear after the game that he's not going anywhere. You're right. It was not only a gutsy performance, but it was also a reminder of just how good he is and how good he can be. His ability to just read, his accuracy, his sidearm throws, like the number of times they kept saying, well, that was Mahomes-like of him. I mean, Stafford's been doing that for a long time. We just weren't paying attention when it was in Detroit because we thought it was only numbers padding. And then with the Rams, we give all the credit to McVay sometimes, and I think sometimes players get lost in that. Like, Puka's a great example of it felt like players get lost in this conversation. Everybody's like, oh, it's McVay. It's McVay. Well, yards after catch isn't McVay. I love coaches, but man, like if Puka Nacua catches the ball 5 yards down the field and turns it into 27 yards, I would like to credit the player at some point. That happened over and over. So I think Stafford and Nacua both have shown you that as great as McVay is as a coach, like you've got individual efforts that are truly elite levels from those players.
Well, and Fitz, I think it's a great point about how we as the public perceive so much of quarterback play is through those extra effort moments. And really that's for every position, but with quarterback especially, like a lot of people were bringing up, as we take the whole weekend that we've seen so far in totality, Fitz, a lot of people were bringing up Cam Newton because Cam Newton got taken through the absolute ringer a few weeks ago when he said that he thought guys like Tua, guys like Dak Prescott, guys like Brock Purdy were more game managers than they were game winners, than they were playmakers, like Cam Newton was back in the day. And as many people have pointed out, seeing what happened with Dak, seeing what happened with Tua, if you're Cam Newton, would look like a victory lap. And while I would push back on that notion some for both guys in certain spots, Jason, it is also, and I think we've seen it a little bit more with Dak over a long sample size, and we've seen it in spots with Tua, but in general, that is the difference. Like when we try and measure Jared Goff and Matthew Stafford against each other, Jared Goff played a great game in that game, but we saw also how stout the group around him was. The group around Matthew Stafford and the Rams was great, but there were some of those plays that you looked at and said, there are only a handful of guys that can make getting hit, laying the ball in those spots, the crazy arm angles, the stuff that it just seems so foreign to such a large section of the quarterback population.
We've talked a lot about quarterbacks and how the new era of quarterbacks are more mobile, they're more athletic, blah, blah, blah. I think in my mind, sometimes what it comes down to is I think you need a quarterback that can execute the offense to the highest possible level, but that can also save your offense 6 or 7 times a game. And I don't mean necessarily with your legs. It can be any, like, we saw Stafford do that. The play where he had somebody barreling down, forgive me for not remembering who it was, and somehow underhand sidearm, weird motion, gets the ball out and gets a first down out of it. Like, those are the moments where it's not about necessarily, hey, this is a running quarterback or whatever we want to associate with that. It's can your quarterback take 6 or 7 times in the game and just save an offense? And that's what Stafford did. And they lost the game. But I think sometimes when we talk about Cam and the conversation of game managers, I don't want to put words in his mouth. He certainly knows the position better than I ever will. But I think that's more the essence of the modern quarterback is you need somebody that can save your coaches 6 or 7, whether it's with their legs, their arms, their eyes, however they're doing it. They can make plays off schedule that keep drives alive 6 or 7 times a game. That's the difference between having a guy and having the guy to me.
100%. Oh, I remember having that conversation on air with Dan Orlovsky years ago, a guy who came into the NFL and was a starter for a while and then transitioned to being a backup, and said the conversation he had with coaches is the difference between being a starter and a backup in the NFL is about 5 plays a game. It's about 5 plays a game that you can impact differently than the vast majority of quarterbacks that go out there. And Jason, as a former offensive lineman, it's always how I've thought about it. Can you get us out of a jam every once in a while? Are you good enough to paper over some of the inefficiencies elsewhere in your roster? Or does everything have to look perfect? And I think that's why the Brock Purdy's of the world get a little bit of side eye sometimes, because the moment we've seen that team without some of their key weapons, it doesn't look quite the same. And environment's important. We talk out of both sides of our mouths a fair amount with this stuff, but at the end of the day, I do believe what you're saying there is right. And I think this weekend was a testament to it. We talked about CJ Stroud and the Texans getting that win over the Browns. Look at the regular season matchup and who was under center for the Houston Texans and how that game went. And look at the postseason matchup. CJ Stroud, that goose egg in the sack column for the Cleveland Browns defense is just as much a quarterback stat. Like always, if you look at the difference between sack percentage and pressure percentage on teams, you get to attribute some of that to the quarterback's ability to buy time, get the ball out on time, or just use his legs to get away from stuff.
Yeah, I think let's go even further. We were just talking about the Dolphins and the Chiefs. One of the biggest difference there, I mentioned the Mahomes run. It was the backbreaker for the Dolphins defense. It was a play off schedule that kept a drive alive. It happened to be a run. Mahomes does that with his arms and his legs. That's what makes him so dangerous. He saves drives multiple ways. Tua wasn't really capable of doing that play in and play out. It just felt like they were a little bit stuck. You're right. Like as you look at this and you start to figure out who's, elite, whatever that means, you do have to look sort of at the quarterback. Like you need a coaching staff that's willing to give the quarterback the freedom to save them. You need a coaching staff that has the lack of ego to allow that to happen. And you need a quarterback that can ultimately execute what the coaches are asking while also then having the confidence and the freedom to go off schedule when he has to. Like I think this is a little bit of a perfect cake is a mix of absolute great ingredients, right? Like I think this is those great ingredients have to all come together. It takes compromise from all sides.
So Fitz, we had 2 young quarterbacks step up in Jordan Love for the Green Bay Packers, who, is, I get it, multiple years into his NFL career, but in his first year as a starter on his rookie contract still. We had CJ Stroud, like we talked about, and then we had 2 veteran-laden teams in the Lions and the Kansas City Chiefs get wins this weekend. Who surprised you the most of what we saw from this weekend?
I think there were a lot of surprises this weekend, but the way the Packers went in, I think what surprised me the most, not to make it about the negative, is how the Cowboys just laid down. But the Packers took advantage of it. The way Jordan Love played, I don't think you go back and watch that Monday night game that I was obviously invested in as a Raiders fan against the Raiders and look at the difference in accuracy for Jordan Love for 4 or 5 games in the middle of the season. It looked like my guy was barely going to get to 50%, right? Like it looked wildly off. Now I know he had some rust to work off, but the difference between Jordan Love in the middle portion of the season versus Jordan Love in the last 3 or 4 weeks is substantial. Part of that's got to be coaching. Part of that's got to be the player. But, man, I think the difference in Jordan Love, even in this game, he carved up. And then just the inability of the Cowboys to cover. I mean, there were some of those plays where I felt like the Packers, who, by the way, remember, it was the Packers don't have any offensive weapons, right? Like those offensive weapons that supposedly didn't exist were back there opening their picnic basket, having a little feast. Like they were so open, they could just sit down on the field, have a meal, step up, and then get touchdowns. I thought the Packers' performance was truly stunning.
Yeah, I do think you're right. And what Matt LaFleur has done post Aaron Rodgers leaving there, like that's another guy. A lot of people weren't sure how much credit to give him. It was almost like the Eric Spoelstra situation in Miami where everyone said, well, yeah, you've got a future Hall of Fame quarterback. Of course everything's going to look great. And he has coached his whole ass off this year. And by the way, had some quotes after the game talking about how much more fun this year's been. I can't imagine why.
I mean, Mike, I said this last night on one of my Yahoo shows. It was Sunday Night Blitz with Frank Schwab. I said last night on our show, it is time to simply acknowledge that the Packers are better without Aaron Rodgers, and they won this entire trade. Like, we're spending all this time talking about Aaron Rodgers, and I realize he was hurt this year. Doesn't matter. The Packers figured out what they have at quarterback. They figured out that they're going to be pretty good for the next several years. They've had a better year than anybody expected. The young weapons have all developed, and they did all of it without Aaron Rodgers. Like, there is a very clear-cut, simple winner in the trade of Aaron Rodgers, and it's the Green Bay Packers. Like, Gutekunst, LaFleur, Jordan Love, there's a lot of people that need to sit down and apologize to all of them. And by the way, it is okay at this point to admit that the loss of Aaron Rodgers was a benefit to the Packers.
Well, especially because of the timeline, like because of Jordan Love's youth, which was always the bet. The Packers did the hard thing. Now, again, I will still go back and say we can judge process and say the way they handled that transition of not giving their current Hall of Fame quarterback the heads up that, hey, we're going to do this in the draft, not the way to go about it, and clearly caused a fissure that made the last few years uglier than I think they needed to be. Although we've seen since then, Aaron Rodgers has a lot to do with this, given his personality type and given what we know about him. But you're right, Jason. They bet on their ability to scout and develop this position, and they won because of that. And very few organizations, I think, have a level of honesty with themselves about how they scout and evaluate and develop certain positions or football teams in general in the way they attack this process. And so there is a huge win in this for the Green Bay Packers, no doubt. But there's also, at the time that they were able to go out and do these things, Joe Barry's defense that has been much maligned for a lot of this season, stepping up, forcing some big turnovers in this game, being able to shut down a Cowboys rushing attack that had been mediocre for a lot of the back end of this season. And then on the other side, the Packers figuring out the offensive line in front of him. Like you mentioned, what Jordan Love has looked like late in the season, I don't think it's any coincidence that it's also coincided with the best version of their offensive line combination coming together. What we saw what we saw last night from Aaron Jones in that rushing attack, being able to go out there. Like, postseason football across the board, I know it's cliche and I know people think it just sounds dumb and lazy to say, but look at the teams who ran and were able to stop the run. Like, it doesn't have to be the best thing that you do in the modern NFL, but it's a prerequisite to the party. Like, if you have one of those glaring flaws, like we saw with the Cowboys, you're not going to be able to get through this because it's the easiest way from point A to point B.
Yeah, if you can't stop the run, like, you got to be able to run efficiently. And I think modern metrics and analytics tell you that. You don't have to be a running team. You have to be able to be efficient when you run. If you can't stop the run, you just can't win in the playoffs because you can't possess the ball enough to do a damn thing about it. And, that's the part of this. Like, I think the ripple effects for the Cowboys loss are huge. Yes, we're all talking about will McCarthy keep his job. A few days ago, I said there's no way he doesn't. I didn't expect a blowout. Now I can't find a way that he keeps his job. What does it mean for Dak's future is real. But also, I'm sorry, but how are you going to sell Dan Quinn? Like, Dan Quinn was supposed to be a hot head coaching candidate. What are you going to your fan base now when you hire Quinn and saying pay no attention to the playoff ass kicking where our defense absolutely got dominated by? No, that's hard for me. I think this makes you question everything about anybody with the Cowboys star on their chest during the course of that playoff game, including Dan Quinn.
Does it make you think that they're thirsty enough to go after Bill Belichick? Because that was the name that was trending with the Cowboys throughout this entire process during the game, was people half expecting to see Belichick in the booth based on this. I have questions about Jerry Jones, who, again, just swallowed his pride enough to let Jimmy Johnson into the Ring of Honor, inviting another coach that would get as much of the credit if things went well as Bill Belichick would. Or do you think that Jerry's desperate enough in his old age to turn to someone like Bill?
Yeah, I think when you're at the stage in life that Jerry's in, sometimes ego doesn't matter as much as the moment that you crave. And right now, what he craves is a Super Bowl. And part of the reason this is win-win is, let's be honest, if we were playing Madden and you had to pick a roster to play with, the Cowboys would be one of the ones you absolutely want. They have so much talent. If you're Bill and you're trying to set the all-time record and you need 14 wins, what job is going to get you to that number faster than that Cowboys team? I feel like realistically, if you look at it for Bill, it's a win. If you look at it for Jerry, it's a win. Both men would have to swallow a little bit of pride, but they both get the thing they covet out of it. We all know, like, at some point, no matter how much pride your grandparents have when they're sitting at the Thanksgiving table, if they're all going to get the turkey they want at the end, they'll swallow a little bit just to get what they want at the food. So I think absolutely it's a good fit.
I do think, and I think especially defensively, I saw, Mina Kimes was talking about the other day on her show, the prospect of, hey, what if Bill Belichick was the new head coach of the Seattle Seahawks? How would you feel? And she noted the defensive prowess that he brings would be a huge bonus. If you're the Dallas Cowboys, Dan Quinn has understandably been lauded for what he's built as far as a defense that especially harasses the quarterback, causes turnovers at a high frequency. But there's no doubt Bill Belichick and what he affords you defensively, while personnel-wise you can ask the question about how it would fit with this current Cowboys group, it would be stock up on that side of the ball. And for Bill on the other side, you've got a quarterback in Dak Prescott that can get it done. Now, the big moment thing is going to follow him. Right, wrong, or indifferent, that's going to be part of the conversation. But Dak was great for the vast majority of this season and then completely pooped his pants in this game. But as far as Bill Belichick and what he's had post-Brady, it would absolutely answer the question for him in a way that would make life easier.
Well, and let's be honest, he's probably going to hire Josh McDaniels to come in and run his offense, which is going to be good for all of those weapons. I think there's this moment, too, as I was headed to the gym this morning, because, I work out. One thing that Chris Canty was saying on ESPN radio is that the Cowboys, as an institution, are soft. If that's the case, if you believe that the players in the locker room are too soft to go out and win these types of games, pretty easy solution to making things tougher in there. Like Belichick is the type of person that would fix a soft culture, right? So, if that's what we believe, I think there's a fix there.
Would you want Belichick or Harbaugh? If you had your choice of both, either is going to say yes if you offer them the job if you're the Cowboys. Which of those guys do you take?
I'd probably take Harbaugh because I have even though Harbaugh goes somewhere different every few years, Harbaugh wins wherever he goes, and he didn't go somewhere. He hasn't left Michigan. So I think Harbaugh may wear people out at the NFL level. Who cares? He wins at the highest possible level. And I don't want to be ageist, but he's younger, so I feel like I could have Harbaugh for much longer than I'm going to get Bill.
Yeah, I think it serves both masters because he's a jump starter outside of Stanford that took a little bit to get online. Everywhere else, it's been paddles on chest, and your football team is now usually good. And again, Dallas isn't far off. Like the bones of a really good team are there, and calling them soft, I think, is just a way of saying, like, hey, you can't really run or stop the run when you want to anymore. There's a difference between being able to do it and being able to do it when you want to, and the Cowboys really struggle with that in a way that's probably going to cost a bunch of people their jobs waking up the rest of this week. Like, that's the reality of the situation with the owner that we know is in place with that team. As far as meaningful change elsewhere, Fitz, we've talked about the Dallas Cowboys and what's probably in store for them. A lot of changes in that building. We talked about the Miami Dolphins. Neither of us think that they should be extending Tua Tagovailoa at one of those market-setting contracts. The other one that's really fascinating to me as far as the losers is the Cleveland Browns. Like, how does everyone there feel about the prospect of Deshaun Watson coming back next year, knowing that Joe Flacco came in towards the end of that season off the couch and immediately eclipsed everything Deshaun had done as a player since he wore a Browns uniform?
Yeah, you're screwed, right? Like, there's no nice way to put this. You're screwed. Like, you don't have a starting quarterback in Deshaun Watson, but you got starting quarterback money invested in him. You can't go out and draft somebody. I mean, it doesn't feel like there's a viable solution there. You're going to have to find a Joe Flacco that you can bring in and hope, or you're just going to, there's this basic principle for me as I've gotten older, Mike. Like, if I go to a bar or restaurant and I order something and I don't like it, I look at it, it's like the money's already spent. All right. Like, I'd rather spend more money and just get what I want. Right. Like, if I'm going to go out to a nice steakhouse and I don't like it, I'm going to order what I like, even if it costs me money. Maybe that's where the Browns need to be with Deshaun. Doesn't matter. Like, at this point, the money spent is the money spent. You got to find some way to get it figured out. Like, go get a different quarterback, even if it means you're spending astronomical money. You can't win with Deshaun, but you can win with Flacco. That's a problem.
I say it was always about Flacco as a proxy for what else was out there, and it's not to diminish Flacco's individual value. I also do love the fact that I think Jason just used a bar analogy to essentially explain sunk cost fallacy. Like, I think that's exactly where we went, was Jason teaching business at the bar.
What is sunk cost fallacy? I don't even know what that sunk cost fallacy. Like, God, you're beautiful and smart. I got no idea what that is.
Google it. I'm pretty sure you know what it is. You just see it in terms of ordering food at a bar instead of how it would read in a business school textbook.
A, I didn't go. Musicians don't go to business school typically, and B, I can't Google it while I'm on air, Mike. God.
Well, you just turned on a light while you were on air, apparently, because the glare off your screen is insane right
Sunlight. It's the sunlight, okay? It's the sunlight, Mike.
Welcome back to GoJo and Golic. So the NFL made the decision to move the Bills-Steelers game to Monday at 4:30 after a massive snowstorm was projected to hit the Buffalo region. You know, everybody's talking about like, oh, come on, like, isn't weather supposed to be a factor in these games? Isn't that why we decided to build the new stadium without a roof? But when you look at this, you understand why the game was postponed, okay? Up to 2 feet of snow was projected to fall in the region over a 24-plus hour period. So heavy snowfall, as you could see there, began to fall mid-afternoon Saturday. You had strong wind. The Bills were posting those whiteout conditions. Also, they had a lot of people in the stadium getting it ready. Is this getting it ready? The shovelers were having some fun with the whole situation. This dude does not have a shirt on. There's a video playing. He does not have a shirt on. He's sliding down the tube that I'm assuming the snow is supposed to go into. And guys, the Bills tweeted this morning that they are still looking for volunteers to come shovel the stadium. So I've seen some tweets since this one went out. And it told fans to be prepared to be sitting on piles of snow because they've been told to only shovel the walkways. So guys, this is a real, that is a snowstorm of epic proportions. I think we can all agree.
It's a snowstorm of very Buffalonian proportions. Like, they're not new to this. They're true to this. And I want to be clear, going back to the point of moving this game, because there were a lot of people belching soft and stuff like that about this. The game got moved because of the safety of the fans going to the stadium. Like, as Eric Wood, their former Buffalo Bills great offensive lineman and radio voice for the team, pointed out, 47 people died in one of the blizzards there last year. Like, this is not a joke for them. This is about the safety of the people trying to get to the stadium to watch a freaking football game. So they did the right thing by moving this. It's still going to be a snowy mess, which is what they're used to up there in Buffalo. And Jason, this is Unfortunately, a game that I think could be very simply about the difference one man provides. TJ Watt, with him on the field and without him on the field, two very different Steelers teams. They're 1-10 without TJ Watt since he joined the Steelers, and they allow 19.8 points per game with him on the field and 26.3 without him on the field. Almost a full touchdown this guy has been worth in his career, and you combine that with the other injuries the Steelers have had at the linebacker level this year, and I just don't know if they're going to be able to stop this particular Bills team that is so James Cook and Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox able in the middle of the field especially.
Yeah, well, and let's be honest, part of the offensive game plan this year for Buffalo has felt like it's just coaches rolling the football out to Josh Allen and saying, help, right? And so, like, this game feels like we're going to see a ton of Josh Allen just, hey, nothing's there. I'm just going to run ahead for 4 or 5 yards. And, you know, I want to double back to something you said and make sure everybody understands. This game was not moved for the health and safety of players and coaches, who the league still does not give a damn about. This game was not moved to help anybody that's actually going to be on the field playing it. This game was moved, and one ESPN reporter, frankly, asked the league and tweeted this out. This game was moved because the league was concerned that they would get stuck in a situation where 70,000 people would be sitting outdoors and stuck in a blizzard, where there's nowhere for them to go and there's nowhere for them to be safe. The last thing the NFL needs is somebody dying in the stands because the game was moved to prevent a death in the stands, not a death on the field. I just want to be clear about, you know, all of that, because the amount of people that were yelling, and former players even that were yelling, well, why didn't they move the Chiefs game? Because, as the league pointed out, cold doesn't keep you from coming and going. Snow does. So, you know, at this point, though, it's going to be an abject disaster of a game. It's going to be ugly, and it's going to be all about who can just move forward. And the answer to who's going to be able to move forward with the line of scrimmage, to me, is the Bills. There is some level of the great equalizer, though. Yet again, we're taking away the one, like, Josh Allen doesn't get the opportunity to really be Josh Allen in this game. And Kenny Pickett, thankfully, doesn't get the opportunity to be Kenny Pickett. Just going to be hand off, and let's see what Najee can do. Hand off and see what your backs can do. Like, I do think that this game throws predictability out the window because the elements are so terrible.
I'd agree. And listen, for Mason Rudolph down the stretch, the one thing you can say, and the one thing,
Mason Rudolph, game, my bad, not Kenny.
I knew what you meant there. It's
the red-nosed reindeer. My fault.
One of the nondescript whites quarterbacking the Pittsburgh Steelers this season. But of that group, he does not turn the ball over and has not turned the ball over since he got under center with them, which is huge because Fitz in this game, the run or pass of it is very interesting to consider. We saw a version of this with Kansas City the other night, and in the lead up to that game, I saw old clips of Tom Brady and Bill Belichick talking from back in the day about how much Tom Brady loved throwing the football in the snow because defensive backs can't get their footing because the offense has the advantage of knowing where they're going. And while it looks like Buffalo's going to be without Gabe Davis in this game, who has been a very important off-speed pitch when he's been on for them, for Stephon Diggs and for the rest of this passing attack for the Buffalo Bills, I do wonder how much Josh Allen, who has the kind of arm that can cut through wind and elements when it is, necessary to do, and also is a capable enough runner himself. I'm with you. It does seem like a game where his ability to take over is even more paramount because everybody else is on such loose footing, and you've got a full-blown moose playing quarterback.
Yeah, this feels like, though, to your point, the ability to push the ball through to the middle of the field to those tight ends is going to be a big part of it. And, Mason, it's funny to me that Mason has put himself in a situation where over the course of the last few weeks, now people are saying, is Mason Rudolph the future quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers? Like, no. The answer to that to me is still squarely no. In this game, Mason Rudolph isn't going to be the difference maker either. The difference maker is going to be, can the Steelers continue to run the ball efficiently? As you mentioned, the Watt element of this is huge. I think that this feels like one of those ugly games where Buffalo just moves down the field 5-6 yards at a time, and 5-6 yards at a time, they just get their way down there. They score enough touchdowns to win. All it's going to take is a 2-touchdown lead, and this thing is over because the Steelers won't be able to throw the ball through this. They won't be able to win.
No, but Buffalo's rush defense isn't the best in the NFL. And for the Steelers in this last 3-game win streak, Najee Harris and Jalen Warren combined 444 yards and 5 touchdowns. Like, they've been really good, and the Steelers have been able to establish that downhill tone. I think it can keep them in it, but ultimately I'm with you. I think Buffalo keeps this rolling on one of the biggest heaters in the NFL. The other game we've got, Fitz, is the Eagles and Bucs game, and with the news that A.J. Brown is not expected to play in this game, coinciding with Jalen Hurts, who dislocated a finger in the last game, and the defense that we've seen for the Eagles completely atrophy over the last year, the Buccaneers and the point seem like a viable play. Like, I get Baker's banged up too, but I just don't know what I can reasonably expect from an Eagles team that seems broken physically and certainly limps into this game from a psyche standpoint, even though they've got all that past experience like we talked about with the Chiefs to draw on.
Yeah, last year the Eagles pass rush masked the Eagles secondary. This year that can't happen. That hasn't happened throughout the course of the year. They have struggled to figure out how to replace both coordinators. We've talked about that. Everybody's talked about that. The Eagles are broken. From a confidence standpoint, from a football standpoint, from a morale standpoint, A.J. Brown scrubbing everybody off his social media. Like, we're talking about things we haven't talked about with the Eagles for a minute, because when you have high expectations and you don't meet them, then everything becomes about the drama. The minute we're talking about the drama, it tells you that things on the field have gone the wrong way. That's the case. Like, the Eagles had something to play for, and the Giants kicked their asses, right? I watched that Week 18 game, and I watched at the same time Tampa Bay go out and struggle to beat Carolina, right? Like, these are two teams that you look at and say, my God, I cannot believe these are playoff teams in this year's NFL. I don't think either of these teams is particularly good, but I do think that Baker and those receivers will be able to get after the back end of this Philly offense, or defense, I should say. That is what worries me if I'm a Philly fan. I have a hard time picking Philadelphia, even though everything in my heart wants to see Philly, because every week I feel like I want to see Philly come out and be the Eagles that we thought they could be, but I think this year's just been lost for them.
Yeah, I think offensively, I want to see them simplify the equation. They're healthy enough with, Dallas Goedert and the offensive line to maybe make that happen. But I'm with you. I'd take the Bucs and the points in this game. The only real winner in this game is the Detroit Lions, because they get to face one of these teams right now that's total chaos, and they look like the poster of stability, which is a wild thing to get to say now, where the Detroit Lions look like the much more stable stock to buy heading into the rest of this postseason than the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Philadelphia Eagles, that are going to square off in a game that on paper looks like it'll be the worst of the weekend. So you know how this goes, Fitz. We're going to end up getting an overtime thriller out of these two teams where somehow they will muster the absolute best that football has to offer. So that's been a lot of the NFL slate that will finish up tonight. Coming up next, though, let's dip back into college, as the biggest hire in the sport finally got made over this weekend.
Welcome back to GoJo and Golic. Feels like we're still reeling from the news of Nick Saban retiring, but Bama is on to the next. They announced on Saturday that former Washington head coach Kalen DeBoer would be taking over as the 28th head coach in Bama history. He spoke about stepping into this role and stepping into the shoes of an absolute legend.
It's a privilege to be chosen to be in this role. It's one I don't take lightly. And I know that Coach Saban's been working hard to make sure that this program is in a great spot for the next person to take over. Being in a room last night where, I saw a team that has stuck together. Greg talked about 72 hours, okay? I want you to put yourself in those guys' shoes, okay? The legendary coach, okay, that they came to play for, all right? And now what's next? And I can't tell you how much I appreciate them already. And I've had multiple meetings last night, today with them, individually, leadership groups. I know how badly they want to continue the tradition, how they want to do it the right way. And them just getting to know me here in just a few hours, it's been a blast. And I can't wait for the journey that lies ahead.
Guys, Kalen DeBoer has a 104-12 record. Never coached in the SEC. So here we go.
Yeah, Jason, a lot of people love to do the fit conversation when it comes to this. And I get it. Experience in a particular conference or in a particular region is important when it comes to recruiting, the relationships that you've got with high school coaches in the area and the kind of things that allow you to sort of put the border up in certain areas. But I think Alabama was tasked with something impossible in replacing Nick Saban. And what they did in hiring Kalen DeBoer is as close as you can come in my mind to acing the test, because the guy can coach ball. Like, you look at what he's done at every stop along the way, obviously going all the way back to, Sioux Falls and what he did at that level. But in his time as the coordinator at Indiana with Michael Penix the first time around, his time at Fresno State and what he did with Jake Haener, and now in Washington in short order, getting into the national title in a couple of seasons, this is a guy that walks in, immediately listens to and connects with his players, can certainly coach offense and has that pedigree, and I think has shown an ability to adapt in multiple stops already, which is all you can ask for a guy coming in trying to replace the greatest college football coach of all time.
I think sometimes what people miss when they talk about replacing a legend and particularly having any footprint in the South is that Nick Saban's not going anywhere, right? Like, think about what we heard the last day of work. He was still there early in the morning, last out interviewing assistant coaches. Nick Saban's going to walk DeBoer into every coach's office in the South that he needs to, right? Like, Saban's not going to suddenly disassociate with Alabama. I think that's an important line here. And you're right. I had the chance to spend a pretty good amount of time with Washington players around media day, and the respect that the players have for him, and then talking to the coach. There was a joke made about the fact that he never raises his voice. And I asked him about specifically that. And he laughed and said, look, I mean, never's an ultimate answer. But he said, the thing for me is that we have to be consistent and we have to manage our emotions. And if I'm asking my players to do that and I can't, then who am I? But what struck me is that the players had so much respect for the process that DeBoer goes through and how he treats everybody as human beings. I think in the modern culture of college football and the NFL, that matters. I don't know that you can come in necessarily in the current age. If you're Saban, you can be whoever you want to be. If you're coming in and replacing Saban, the one thing you have to be at Alabama is really sure of who you are and comfortable in who you are so that you can be your own coach and not try and be the replacement to Saban, but just be yourself. In my time hanging around Kalen DeBoer, I think he has all of those things. He's very comfortable with who he is and what his process is. I think that needed to be one of the main requirements for this job.
100%. I think that was the first impression I took away talking to him last year when he was taking over at Washington. Was one of his first directives was come in and he asked the players about what they thought about certain things, and he didn't try and come in and immediately clear out room and demand that they follow exactly what he said to the letter of the law under some iron fist. Because you're right, it is a different time in college football. I think even in a place like Alabama, given the circumstances, and the recruiting stuff will be important. Like, you are going in and now having to recruit against Kirby Smart and what Brian Kelly's done at LSU and all these different things that are absolutely going to be a challenge in the most ferocious conference in America. But you also got other wins. Ryan Grubb, I mean, we saw Washington announce that Jed Fish, the quarterback from Arizona, or excuse me, the head coach at Arizona, now former head coach, is going to be the next head coach. They put pen to paper on that at UW. But that came after the announcement from Ryan Grubb, the offensive coordinator that had been with Kalen at Washington, said, I wanted to be the head coach here. That's not going to be the case. And now it's announced that he is likely going to be following Kalen DeBoer to Alabama, which is huge for them. One of the most lauded coordinators in college football last year is going to continue evolving offense at a place in Alabama that we know has majored more in that in the later stages of the Saban era than it ever did in the early going.
Yeah, and by the way, I think that was a mistake by Washington. Let me be very clear on that. I think letting him go, letting him walk out of the building was a mistake by Washington. But now, think of the sales pitch when you are talking to players. Hey, I just had a runner-up for the Bolitnikoff Award that, by the way, is also going to be a top 5 draft pick, right? I got a Heisman Trophy finalist at quarterback that we were able to get the most out of. Dylan Johnson's going to be somebody that plays on Sundays. Like, you look at the ability to get production out of everybody in that offense. I think that becomes part of Kalen DeBoer's sales pitch. And one thing that really hit me at media days, and I know I've told you this before, but the way the team sort of gravitates to themselves. One thing that when I asked everybody about, being overlooked and disrespect, the number of times different Washington guys said, look, life is us versus us. It's only about how we take of our business. That's all we care about, which actually mimics much of what Nick Saban has said. Like, if you listen to some of his best quotes, it's, if you're worried about being better than everybody else, then you're worried about the wrong thing. You got to be worried about being the best version of yourself. I think the similarity in some of their messaging actually makes this a pretty smooth transition, even behind the scenes. You're not suddenly coming in and changing the way players think. You're just changing the person that runs it. I think there are some real similarities to the core foundation pieces of DeBoer and Saban.
I'd agree. It's going to be interesting how quickly that's received by players, because the one thing we have seen is there's been some attrition from the recruiting class for Alabama, where they've had decommitments in this most recent class. You've seen a couple of guys. Isaiah Bond, their speedy wide receiver, already has entered the portal and committed to go play for Sark at Texas, and said this is a business decision. He said it's 100% tied to Nick Saban leaving and me trusting what Steve Sarkisian can do for me as an offensive skill player. So we do know that's a part of this now, is Alabama had to make this decision quick, or else they were going to probably see more guys do that. And so him being able to come in and, if he can, show that steady hand right away like that is going to go a long way in what Alabama is going to look like in the immediacy next year, because it is going to be interesting what they do at quarterback. Jalen Milroe's coming back, so how they're going to build the offense around him now with this new group coming in, transitioning from what Saban and Tommy Rees were doing last year, and how quickly they can get that message communicated so that now all of a sudden the guys in the current roster stick, but maybe transfers do look at them in the spring portal as a place that's a desirable destination for offensive guys, and the recruits they've been able to build up hold on as well.
And losing a recruit losing a player from Alabama to Texas because of the Sarkisian tie, that makes some sense, right? There are some ties there behind the scenes that I think make some sense. I can't speak for Isaiah Bond. If I'm a wide receiver, I don't know that there are a lot of coaches or offenses I'd rather play for than Kalen DeBoer. I just based on what he's been able to do with that position specifically, he gets guys Sunday ready. And that, in modern college football, as you well know, that's a huge sales pitch sitting in there. It's like, hey, name, image, likeness ain't going to be a problem at Alabama, and I can continue to get you Sunday ready. Like, that is, that's a hell of a sales pitch for him to be able to walk in with.
No, completely agree. I do think with Sark, it's 6 of one, half dozen to the other, because that's a guy with a pretty well-known offensive resume as well. But I do think it does speak volumes. I think for Alabama, this is outside of landing Dan Lanning, who I said would have been my first call from that group. I think Kalen DeBoer is a professional. I think he is a guy that has a proven track record at so many levels in college football, showed it again in the team that we just saw in the national championship, and is going to give Alabama the best chance possible at trying to stick the landing post Nick Saban. For Washington, we'll see on the other side. Jed Fish, a hell of a ball coach, but the roster that he is going to get is going to look drastically different than the one that we saw in the title this last year. So lots up in the air in the world of college football. We get to finish off Super Wildcard Weekend. But coming up next, let's get to the real star of the weekend that was here, who made a fashion statement that is likely going to echo through the rest of this postseason. All right, guys, time to finish off the show the way we always do. This, that, and the third. 3 quick stories to send you off into the rest of your day. As always, make sure you download, subscribe, rate, review us, leave us a 5-star rating, and try and check us out live Monday through Friday. But if you can't, 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern here on the DraftKings Network YouTube page, Samsung TV Plus, Roku, and more. You can go and get us wherever you get our podcasts and check in on our great guests like our buddy Jason Fitz, who helped us out big time today. Round of applause for Jason Fitz, stepping up and pitch hitting for Dad, who we hope is having a safe travel day in his return home from Dallas. There is my dad's very sad-looking, empty, dark casita in Scottsdale for those watching on YouTube. You guys can follow him on Twitter at Jason Fitz. Check him out over at Yahoo Sports, doing great stuff covering the NFL, college football, all variety of sports, as well as listen to him on Fox Sports Radio. And Jason, you're the perfect guy to talk about this with, as we've got a couple of NFL coaching updates heading into the beginning of silly season. The Chargers will be the first NFL team to interview Michigan head coach Jim Harbaugh. Harbaugh took a week to celebrate Michigan's first national title since 1997 and now is putting eyes towards the future. So the Chargers are going to get the first crack at him, Fitz, and it seems like for your beloved Raiders, Antonio Pierce right now viewed as the front runner to retain that head coaching job. So are you happy to hear that about Antonio Pierce, or are you getting a little bit jealous looking at the Chargers and Jim Harbaugh?
Look, I think the Chargers and Jim Harbaugh will be a delightful match, and I think Harbaugh would have been a great coach for the Raiders, but I don't think there's any choice better than Antonio Pierce. He simply understands the culture in that locker room. He's earned the opportunity with the results he had on the field. The players love him, and that has to matter. I mean, it was made clear over the weekend that Max Crosby is prepared to demand a trade if he doesn't get the coach he wants. There's a reason for that, especially for guys that have lived through year after year after year of change. Stability has to matter at some point, Mike. And I just kept watching this weekend thinking the coaching hires that get it right more often than not are not just great hires. They're people that I think understand the community, understand the culture, understand the sales pitch around it. Dan Campbell is Detroit, right? Like there's this level of Dan Campbell speaks to Detroit. DeMeco Ryans speaks to the Texans. There's a reason that they work in those situations. Antonio Pierce not only got great results, but I think he speaks to what it means to be the Raiders. And that has to have some meaning. So the fact that it means so much to, I think, one of the best Raiders I've ever seen and what it means to that locker room, I think this is a natural hire. You got to go this direction. If you get it wrong, fine. But at some point, this to me makes the most sense. It's win-win, Harbaugh or Antonio Pierce, but I'll take my chances with Antonio Pierce all day.
And what you mentioned about those last two guys really leads to the most important part then. Even if you do pick Antonio Pierce, who I think displayed a lot during this, is now you got to nail the quarterback the way that the Lions were able to with Jared Goff, who was a former top overall pick, and the way the Texans certainly did with C.J. Stroud picking him at the top of their draft this year. They've got to figure that situation out. The Jimmy Garoppolo experiment was a failure. Aiden O'Connell looked good, but is not the long-term answer for that team. Fitz, quick one there. Do you think they go veteran or young guy at quarterback this offseason, the Raiders?
I think they would make a historic offer to try and move up to the top of the draft to any of those top 3 picks to get a quarterback. Unfortunately, I don't think it'll get done. I don't think anything will make a trade happen to get out of those top 3 picks. So they're going to have to look in the market and try and find somebody. So, this just feels like one of those, hey, Cowboys, you want to give up on Dak? I'll take him. I'm just saying, I'd take him.
I was going to say, Dak, Tua, all of a sudden, if a franchise is really looking to get froggy this offseason, maybe the Raiders can be that soft landing spot to help them through those tough times. Those will be interesting, but not nearly as interesting as what we're going to talk about now. Jesse, let's get to that and the real star of the Juszczyk household shining bright this weekend.
Kristen Juszczyk, she is going mega viral right now. She designed custom puffer jackets for Brittany Mahomes and the Taylor Swift. That's right. And the jackets obviously going crazy all over the internet. Everyone's losing her minds. She posted a video on how she made them, the process that she went through. She also designed a Lions one for Taylor Lautner that made its way to him. So she's hitting Twilight, she's hitting Taylor Swift, she's got Brittany Mahomes. Obviously going super viral, like I said. She, like you said, she's the true star of the Juszczyk household, right?
It was huge. There's a couple levels to this. So she'd been making custom clothing. You can go look on her Instagram page for herself, for people around her. She had done a piece for Simone Biles and her husband Jonathan Owens for the Packers not too long ago, but obviously shot her shot with Taylor Swift in a way that is probably going to change her life, to be honest, Fitz. Like, this looks like something the NFL could and should partner with, being that she's the wife of a player. They've got that easy fold in, but we also know women are an incredibly utilized market of the NFL. There's such a big fan base of women that watch the sport who have been, I think, only placated with the stuff that the NFL has marketed to them. And now to have someone who is actually valuing that section of the NFL fan base and giving them things that they might actually want could be an incredible partnership for both sides.
Yeah, I mean, you got to take advantage of the Taylor Swift audience that you just got from that. There's no doubt about it. That would take mass production and a lot of steps. I'm betting her life right now is very hectic. Hopefully, it frees up enough time for her to make me one that has the Crosby feel on it. I'm just saying, Mike, you'd look good in one from Notre Dame. I'm just saying, let's leverage some things here. Although Juice, I don't think it's going to respond to either of us when we try to get these things.
No, I may have tried to DM both of them to see if she would want to come on the show, but that's neither here nor there. What a massive L, by the way, for all the losers still complaining about Taylor Swift swag surfing in the box at the game this weekend. She showed up and popped open the window at Arrowhead. Built different and a decent swag surf. I can't believe we're still swag surfing in 2024. I saw Chris Jones after say they needed a different stadium DJ largely for that reason. But if you're going to do it, she didn't hold back at all, which I appreciate in a game where Travis Kelce, pretty good game, not a great game, a couple of weird drops, but ultimately stock up for all of us who are just normal people who can consume football, and stock way down for losers still complaining that Taylor Swift is just existing in the NFL space.
Yeah, nobody was complaining when Eminem was shown during the Lions broadcast. I'm just if you're a grown-ass adult that has a problem with Taylor Swift being in the broadcast for the 30 seconds she's here and there and everywhere on that broadcast, just shut up. At the end of the day, just sit down, shut up, and color in your book, because you're showing how small you are every time you go to social media and complain about 30 seconds of a broadcast being spent on somebody you don't like. It's a stupid thing to complain about.
Exactly. So instead, we will shout out both Kristen Juszczyk for obviously making these wonderful things, her husband Kyle Juszczyk for being there in the replies of every tweet and making sure that his baby got credit. Ladies, if he wanted to, he would. That is the ultimate lesson coming off this weekend. Jesse, let's get to the third, though, and finish with maybe the best clip from this entire weekend here. Maurice Jones-Drew, the hero that we didn't even know we needed.
Yeah, so he's on set with Chris Rose, after Chiefs defeated the Dolphins, whatever. They're talking about the game, and a beautiful moment was created.
But this is far and away the best defense that Patrick Mahomes has had, right? I mean, is it possible that they can ride the D? The defense?
Okay.
I like that he had to clarify the defense, obviously.
like so rarely, and I think just coming off of Pat McAfee on College Game Day, the let a naysayer know moment from that show, where we had someone stop and acknowledge the moment that everybody could feel sitting there around watching. Maurice Jones-Drew stepped up in the next way that we needed, because you can't let that level of sexual innuendo go unchecked, Fitz.
Look, as the resident child on every show you've ever worked on, I was so proud of this. Like, I just looked at it was a chef's kiss moment right there where you just stopped. Like, I stood up and I slow clapped MJD for this. Like, this was a beautiful, beautiful piece of art by him that will live on forever. The look will be turned into memes. The moment will be turned in. And every time we talk about defense, somebody in the room is going to giggle like a middle school child. I am here for every ounce of it.
Yeah, and it was just so smooth the way he just was like, he gave the pause, he got the clarification, and then, just moved on. But it was masterful, truly.
It was the pregnant pause, the absolutely lethal side eye here. If we're looking for winners of the weekend, like we said, Kristen Juszczyk sitting at the top of the pile right now, new fashion NFL icon. But Maurice Jones-Drew taking up the mantle for all of us that refuse to grow up, no matter what our parents or anyone else in our lives try and tell us. You can be a child forever. Just look at our good friend Maurice Jones-Drew. You can also be a child forever with us. If you appreciate that, download, subscribe, rate, review us. Leave us a 5-star rating. Support our buddy Jason Fitz, who came in and helped us out big time today at Jason Fitz on Twitter. Thanks so much. Enjoy the end of Wild Card Weekend. We'll talk to you tomorrow.